glory, torture, entertainment. When you think of Rome, your mind goes straight to white marble and deep philosophy. You picture emperors debating honor in sunlit gardens. What you never picture is the horror waiting for those Rome defeated. Not during battle. After. When the killing stopped, the spectacle started, and the conquered were still alive to suffer through every second of it. That is where Rome drops the mask. And underneath, there is nothing noble, only savagery dressed in ceremony. Because Roman victory was just the opening act. The nightmare came next. Queens who once commanded empires were paraded through screaming streets like exotic animals. Warlords who led armies of 50,000 men spent their final breaths rotting in underground dungeons beneath holy temples. The virgin daughters of kings were tossed to legionnaires like spoils of war, their fates sealed by Roman law and Roman applause. The same empire that invented sophisticated courts and preached stoic discipline also engineered public degradation so extreme that their own chroniclers flinched when recording it. This is that story. We walk alongside Queen Zenobia as she stumbles through Rome wrapped in golden chains meant to mock her power. We stand with Boudicca as Roman whips tear into her flesh, while her own tribe watches in horror. We descend into the Tullianum with Vercingetorix as daylight disappears and the crowd above roars for his death. This is not the sanitized version from your history class. This is what they bury beneath words like conquest and civilization. Before we witness the darkest hours these rulers ever faced, drop a comment with your city and country, because once you see what Rome truly was, you will never see it the same way again. The battlefield outside Antioch is dead quiet. No more screaming, no more clashing steel, just Roman soldiers walking through corpses, sorting the breathing from the gone. Queen Zenobia's army is shattered. Her commanders already know what defeat usually means. You fight, you lose, you die with some shred of dignity. But Rome never followed that script. Rome had other plans for the living. Dead enemies send one message. Broken survivors send that message for generations. Here is what your teachers never mentioned. The moment that battle ended, Zenobia stopped being a person in Roman eyes. Their lawyers had a clean little phrase for it: Ius Gentium, the law of nations. Sounds civilized, sounds reasonable. In reality, it meant this: if you are not Roman and you lose to Rome, you become property. Your throne means nothing. Your victories mean nothing. Your bloodline means nothing. Roman law for defeated foreigners was brutally simple. You are whatever the winner says you are. Roman citizens, even the poorest ones, had protections. They could not be publicly flogged without legal proceedings. They could not be executed without a formal sentence. They had rights, at least technically. Foreign prisoners had zero. The oldest Roman laws, the 12 tables from centuries before, had already made this clear. Captives belong to the state or to whoever captured them. You can be sold, traded, used. There is no court that will hear your case, no judge who cares about your story. The law already decided. You lost. The contrast is savage. A Roman citizen standing before a magistrate is a human being under the law. A captured queen standing before a Roman general is an asset. That is all. Yesterday she commanded legions. Today she is inventory, ranked alongside shields, coins, horses, and slaves on a logistics sheet. The only question anyone asks is not what is just. The only question is how useful is she breathing? If you were a man, your future was limited and ugly. You could be sold into brutal labor. You could be thrown into the mines. You could be dumped into an arena to bleed for entertainment. A few wealthy nobles might be ransomed if their families had enough gold. If not, you became a long-term prisoner or disposable spectacle. Rome had perfected a system for turning defeated warriors into profit and public amusement. If you were a woman, especially royalty, things got worse. Roman military culture treated captured women as rewards. Some aristocratic prisoners were kept in supervised houses and handled with surface politeness while deals were negotiated. But polite never meant safe. And that was the lucky minority. For most women, the line between prisoner of war and slave existed only on paper. In real life, that line did not exist. Female captives faced forced labor, forced sex, forced marriages, forced transformation into household property. A royal gown could be replaced by a slave collar in a single moment. One day you are the daughter of a king. The next day you are handed from one officer to another like a piece of furniture. No documents, no discussion. Just a decision made by men who know no law will ever challenge them. The empire had nothing in its legal framework that protected the dignity of conquered women. They were not citizens. They were loot. But Rome understood something beyond raw violence. Rome understood theater. Rome understood terror. Rome understood that if you want to dominate the world, you do not just win wars. You show everyone what happens to those who dared resist. You transform their defeat into a public event. That is where the triumph enters the story. The triumph was not just a parade. It was state-sponsored humiliation. It was a day-long ritual of absolute dominance. Only a handful of generals ever received a triumph. You needed a massive victory, enormous enemy casualties, and new territory absorbed into Rome. Then the Senate voted. If they approved, the city prepared. The route through Rome stretched for miles. From the Field of Mars, through packed streets, through the Forum, up to the Capitoline Hill. Merchants closed their shops. Families abandoned their homes. People crushed into every available space just to witness it. At the front of the procession came noise and color. Trumpets, drums, performers to keep the mob excited. Behind them, carts overflowing with captured treasure. Gold, silver, weapons, shields, statues ripped from foreign temples. Then came paintings and models of destroyed cities, so Romans could see what their legions had annihilated in lands they would never visit. Exotic animals from conquered territories dragged along in chains. Every element screamed the same sentence. We took all of this, and no one could stop us. And then came the humans, the prisoners. This is the part of the line where you do not want to be. Captured kings, queens, princes, generals, their children. Some were dressed in rags. Others were kept in their royal clothing deliberately. Rome wanted the contrast. They wanted the crowd to see crowns and chains in the same image. The higher your former status, the more entertainment value your collapse provided. Soldiers marched in polished armor, while the defeated stumbled ahead, wrists bound, ankles shackled, watched by thousands of hungry Roman eyes. Roman historians like Tacitus did not soften this. He wrote about conquered British leaders paraded and humiliated without hesitation. Roman officials never said, "This is excessive." They said, "This is effective." Crushing the pride of royalty in full public view was not a side effect. It was the entire point. It told every ally and every enemy, if you fight Rome and lose, this is your destiny. You will not disappear quietly. You will be marched, mocked, and discarded. when the show ends. For royal women, the humiliation cut deeper. Their bodies became part of the message. As they walked the endless route, crowds stared, shouted, laughed, pointed. No one was coming to save them. There were no curtains to hide behind. The march lasted hours. The route was deliberately slow so every district of the city could enjoy the view. For a captive queen, every single step was a reminder. You are no longer a ruler. You are content. Now bring Zenobia back into focus. She was not some minor figure. She was not a token client queen. She led Palmyra, a city that controlled trade routes between the Roman world and the East. After Rome's crisis in the 3rd century, when emperors were rising and falling within months, Zenobia saw opportunity. She moved fast. She pushed her territory into Egypt and across Syria. She ruled lands that had been Roman provinces. Rome noticed. Rome was already hemorrhaging from internal chaos and external threats. Having an Eastern queen acting like a peer power was unacceptable. Emperor Aurelian was not a philosopher. He was a professional eliminator of problems. He rebuilt Roman authority with ruthless efficiency. When he turned his attention to Zenobia, he did not send diplomatic messages. He sent legions. Campaign after campaign hammered Palmyrene control. City after city was dragged back under Roman authority. Finally, near the Euphrates, as Zenobia tried to escape east toward Persian territory, she was caught. No dramatic final stand. No honorable duel. She was pulled into Roman custody, alive. From that instant, her story no longer belonged to her. It was a Roman asset. Aurelian knew exactly what he possessed. This was the woman who had minted coins with her own face in lands Rome claimed. This was the queen whose armies had marched into Egypt. Killing her quietly would waste an enormous propaganda weapon. Keeping her for a triumph would tell every governor, every general, every foreign monarch. Try to copy her, and you will end up exactly where she ends up. 2 years after her capture, Rome was ready. The empire had survived a storm, invasions, economic collapse, civil war. Aurelian had pushed enemies back, stabilized the borders, and crushed the Palmyrene Empire that had challenged him. He needed a spectacle to cement his image as Rome's savior. The triumph of 274 CE would be that spectacle. People flooded into the city from the countryside. Rumors spread. An Eastern queen would be displayed in chains. The morning of the triumph, Rome transformed into a stage. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and anticipation. Banners hung from buildings. Soldiers lined the route to control the mob. Priests prepared sacrifices. Aurelian dressed in his special triumphal outfit with a crown and purple cloak. Behind the scenes, prisoners were being arranged, dressed, chained, positioned. Zenobia was not placed at the back of the line. She was placed in the prime position among the captives. Ancient sources describe what she wore. Not rags, not simple clothes, an absurd overload of jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, gems covering her neck, her arms, her dress. On top of that display, heavy gold chains were locked around her wrists and neck. Not thin chains, thick, weighted bands that dragged her down. They were so massive that attendants had to walk beside her to support some of the weight so she would not collapse completely. Every step was agony. Every step reminded her what had been stolen from her. Rome chose gold instead of iron deliberately. This was not about restraint. This was about mockery. The message was razor sharp. All the wealth she had controlled, all the trade routes her empire had managed, all the riches she once commanded had been melted into shackles. She was transformed into a walking display of stolen luxury. She was not just a prisoner. She was a living billboard for Roman power over the East. The crowd roared as she passed. Some screamed insults. Others just stared. Children watched a queen reduced to an exhausted woman struggling not to collapse on the stones. Senators observed from decorated platforms, measuring Aurelian's success. Foreign ambassadors from other kingdoms watched and took mental notes. This is what Rome does to rulers who forget their place. This is the cost of rebellion, transformed into live performance. And what was going through Zenobia's mind during those hours? She knew Roman tradition. She knew the end of a triumph could be the end of a life. Other captured leaders had walked this exact path and never walked out again. Vercingetorix of Gaul had resisted Julius Caesar, been paraded in a triumph, then strangled in a prison beneath the Capitoline. Jugartha of Numidia had marched in chains, then starved in darkness below while people celebrated above. The pattern was unmistakable. Walk the route, entertain the city, die quietly. The route climbed toward the Capitoline hill. The noise intensified, then began to fade as the procession reached its final stage. Temples loomed. Priests moved forward. Somewhere nearby, the entrance to the underground prison waited, the place where so many defeated enemies had vanished. Zenobia did not know if she would be taken there when the cheering stopped. She did not know if this march was the last thing she would ever see. The chains cut into her skin, the jewelry dug into her shoulders. The sun beat down. The queen, who had once dictated terms to provinces, now waited for one man, Aurelian, to decide whether she would live in a villa or die in a hole in the rock. And as she reached the point where other rulers had been dragged away to their final darkness, the question hung in the air. Would Rome turn her into another corpse beneath the hill, or into something even more useful than that? 1608. Aurelian made his decision. When the triumph ended and the crowd scattered, Zenobia did not descend into the rock beneath the Capitoline. No rope tightened around her throat. No silent execution in the darkness. Instead, the emperor transformed her into a permanent ornament for his victory. He gave her a house, land near Rome, a controlled existence under constant surveillance. Not freedom, not death, something in between. Ancient writers say she ended up in a villa outside the city, near Tibur, what we now call Tivoli, a place with gardens, servants, fine food, and walls she could not cross without permission. Some sources claim she married a Roman senator. Others say her daughters were married into respectable Roman families. The details are murky, and historians still argue, but the basic picture is clear. She did not return to being a queen. She became an exhibit in Rome's social world. Think about what that actually means. Every time she appeared at a banquet, every time she walked through an Italian garden, she was a reminder. Guests could look at her and think, that woman once ruled from Egypt to Anatolia. Now she lives here because a Roman emperor decided she could. Her survival was not mercy in any pure sense. It was strategy. Aurelian got to display a living symbol of his dominance for years, instead of just one bloody afternoon. Zenobia's story exposes one of Rome's favorite tricks. They did not always kill their enemies. Sometimes they broke them, then dressed the pieces in nice clothes, and placed them in gilded cages. For a ruler, this could be worse than a clean execution. You had to live with the knowledge that your status was gone forever, and that your very existence advertised your defeat. But not everyone let Rome write the final chapter like that. Some rulers never made it to a triumph. Some refused to let the empire transform them into trophies, and in one case, Rome pushed its humiliation so far that it ignited a fire it could barely contain. Shift the scene from Syrian deserts to the cold, wet island of Britain. The year is around 60 CE. The emperor on the throne is Nero. In the east, he plays the artist and indulges in luxury. In the west, his officials strip provinces for taxes and profit. One of those provinces is Britain, partly conquered, partly ruled through so-called friendly client kings. One of those kings is Prasutagus of the Iceni. Prasutagus tried to play the Roman game. He accepted their support, kept his local throne, and thought he could secure his family's future by making Rome a partner in his will. He left half his kingdom to Nero and half to his two daughters. It was a desperate gamble at balance. Give the emperor a piece and hope he lets the rest survive. Rome did not care about his clever arrangement. When Prasutagus died, the imperial procurator Catus Decianus arrived. A procurator was essentially Rome's financial enforcer. His job was to extract money from provinces and maintain order. He examined the will, examined the lands, and threw the document aside. Roman officials seized everything. They treated Prasutagus's kingdom as if it had always belonged to Rome, and this was simply the moment to collect. Property was confiscated. The local nobility was stripped, beaten, enslaved. Loans that had been generously offered by Roman moneylenders suddenly came due with brutal force. Behind the legal language, it was simple robbery protected by imperial power. And when Prasutagus's widow, Queen Boudicca, protested, she received her answer in the most public way imaginable. Tacitus, the Roman historian whose father-in-law served in Britain, recorded what happened next. Roman officers had Boudicca flogged in front of her own people. They bound her, raised the whip, and laid into her body. Blow after blow. She was not a criminal on trial. She was the queen of an allied tribe that had fought alongside Rome in the past. That did not stop them. They wanted everyone watching to understand who held real authority now. Here is the crucial difference. A Roman woman of status could cause a scandal by being publicly beaten. Even a man of citizen rank being whipped in the open was a serious matter. For Boudicca, there were no such protections. She was outside the circle of Roman citizenship. That made her fair game. Her pain was a message to her people. Your leaders exist at our pleasure. Then they went after her daughters. 2 young girls, royal blood, unmarried. Tacitus does not paint a picture. He uses short, hard words and moves on because even he could barely stomach it. The girls were assaulted, not in private, not hidden. It was done in a way that ensured the tribe witnessed it. The goal was not just to hurt them, it was to crush the spirit of the family line, to grind Roman dominance into the deepest wound possible. This was calculated. This was not a few soldiers losing control. This was policy backed by a legal system that recognized no crime in it. Boudicca and her daughters had no rights Rome felt obligated to respect. They were instruments in a lesson. Resist. And this is what follows. But the lesson backfired. Instead of producing obedience, it produced rage so intense it nearly tore Roman Britain apart. Boudicca did not crawl away and accept her new position. While the whip marks still healed, she began moving from settlement to settlement, calling in allies. Tribes that had been pushed around by Roman governors listened. Warriors who had seen land stripped and friends enslaved started gathering. Many of them had served in Roman auxiliary units and knew how Roman soldiers fought. They also knew something else. If they did nothing, the abuses would never stop. The army Boudicca raised was massive. Tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 if we trust Roman estimates. Men armed with swords, spears, axes, whatever they could find. Women in chariots, elders shouting for revenge. This was not a professional army like a Roman legion. It was a nation with a grudge. Their first target was Camulodunum, a Roman colony sitting on land stolen from local tribes. It had a temple to the deified Emperor Claudius, a stone monument to Roman rule that local people were forced to support with their taxes. Boudicca's forces hit the city hard. They burned buildings, slaughtered the Roman settlers, wiped out the garrison. No negotiated surrender, no mercy. Rome had taught them what mercy looked like. They returned that lesson in full. Next came Londinium, the early version of London. Back then, it was a busy trading town, not yet an official colony, but packed with merchants and Romanized Britons. The governor, Suetonius Paulinus, realized he could not defend it with the troops he had available. He made a cold calculation: evacuate what he could, abandon the city, and save the army for a decisive battle later. Everyone left behind faced Boudicca's fury. Her army poured into Londinium and reduced it to rubble. Buildings burned so hot that archaeologists today can still detect a clear red layer in the ground from the fire. Whoever remained in the town, traders, families, anyone unlucky enough to be there, was killed. Another city, Verulamium, met the same fate. 3 centers of Roman power in Britain obliterated in rapid succession. Tacitus claims around 70,000 Romans and Roman allies died in the uprising. Even if that number is exaggerated, the scale of destruction was enormous. Boudicca had taken the public humiliation Rome inflicted on her and hurled it back in their face. She did not march to Rome in chains. She turned their provinces into graveyards. Eventually, Suetonius Paulinus found ground to fight on his terms. He selected terrain where Roman discipline and armor could overcome raw numbers. Boudicca's warriors formed up in front. Behind them, their families and wagons lined up to watch, blocking any retreat. She rode out and spoke, according to Tacitus, not as a monarch defending a legal claim, but as a woman and a mother answering abuse. She said, in essence, "I am here as one person among you, not as a queen begging for her lost throne. I fight like any other person who has been beaten and whose children have been violated. The Romans see us as slaves. Today we show them we are not." The speech, as Tacitus records it, is raw. It centers on the whipping and the crimes against her daughters as the core reason for war. This is Rome's nightmare made real. Private brutality transformed into a public rebellion that threatens their control of an entire region. The battle ended in catastrophe for Boudicca. Roman legions, when they had room to fight properly, were killing machines. Their tight formations, heavy armor, and discipline tore through the packed British lines. When the front collapsed, there was nowhere to run. The wagons behind became a trap. Tacitus describes a slaughter. Men, women, and children cut down as they tried to flee through their own carts. Boudicca witnessed the defeat and understood exactly what came next if she allowed herself to be captured. She knew Roman habits. She knew what happened to royal women who lost. She knew what a triumph looked like, even if she had never set foot in Rome. The ropes, the jeers, the slow march, the chains biting into skin. She refused to be dragged across an ocean and displayed as a beaten curiosity. So she took poison. Tacitus says she ended her own life rather than let Rome decide how her story would close. No Mamertine Prison, no golden chains, no slow march through a foreign city. She chose a quick exit over becoming a breathing trophy. Her daughters vanish from the record after the initial abuse. No rescue, no closure, just silence, which may be the darkest line in the whole episode. Look at the contrast. Zenobia endures a triumph and spends the rest of her life in controlled comfort, used as a quiet symbol of Roman victory. Boudicca burns cities and refuses to ever be seen in chains, dying on her own terms. Two queens, two different responses to the same system that treated them as objects once they lost. And both stories point to the same core truth. Rome's real strength was not just in legions. It was in how far it was willing to go to crush the pride of those who dared to stand against it. But what about the rulers who had no choice at all? The ones who were not spared like Zenobia and did not escape like Boudicca? The ones Rome marched through the streets and then erased underground? For them, the end came at a place that still exists beneath modern Rome, even if most people walking above have no idea what happened down there. Under the Capitoline Hill, near the political heart of the city, stood the Tullianum, later called the Mamertine Prison. From the outside, it looked like a simple stone structure. Inside, it was a two-level trap. The upper chamber held important prisoners before judgment. The lower chamber, reached only through an opening in the floor, was where sentences were carried out. This was not a vast, complex jail. It was a cramped, damp space carved into rock. The lower level was pitch dark, with no door to the street. To put someone in, you lowered them through the hole. To take them out, you did the same, usually after they were dead. Roman writers mention filth, cold, and suffocating air. If the state wanted you gone, this place did the job quietly. Now bring in Vercingetorix. He had accomplished what almost nobody else managed: unite many of the Gallic tribes against Julius Caesar. He had forced Caesar into hard battles, pinned down legions, and nearly flipped the script on Roman expansion in Gaul. His last stand at Alesia ended with surrender when starvation crushed his army. Caesar kept him alive, not out of compassion, but because he already envisioned the future. A grand triumph in Rome, with this dangerous enemy on display. Vercingetorix spent around 6 years as a prisoner. 6 years knowing his fate was delayed, not cancelled. Locked away while Caesar finished his wars and his political struggles. By the time he was brought to Rome for the triumph in 46 BCE, he was no longer the powerful, proud leader on horseback. He was thin, worn down, transformed by captivity. That was exactly how Rome wanted him. The day of Caesar's triumph, the pattern repeated. Treasure, paintings, captured standards, exotic creatures, a river of plundered goods. Then the prisoners, with Vercingetorix at the front among the defeated. Romans leaned out to see the man whose name they had heard in speeches and letters, the rebel who almost broke their general's campaign. He walked through streets filled with cheers for the very man who had destroyed his people's freedom. The route climbed toward the Capitoline. Temples stood ready for sacrifice. The air was thick with incense and noise. At a certain point near the hill, part of the procession peeled off. The crowd surged to watch Caesar continue toward the Temple of Jupiter. Few observed where the prisoners were taken. They had served their purpose. The city had seen them humiliated. Now the rest would happen out of sight. Guarded by soldiers, Vercingetorix was led to the entrance of the Tullianum. Stone, iron, a small doorway. Inside, a floor with an opening to the pit below. He knew what this was. Every foreign noble brought here understood exactly what this meant. Some begged, some stayed silent, some cursed their captors. None walked back out. The guards prepared the rope. The hole gaped beneath him. Above ground, Caesar's triumph rolled on, drums beating, crowds shouting his name. Below, in the stale air under the hill, a different ritual was about to begin, and Vercingetorix, who had once rallied a continent against Rome, stood on the edge of that hole, waiting for the final move. The rope tightened around Vercingetorix's neck. No speech, no final words recorded for history. One moment, he was standing on the stones of the upper chamber, a man who had once made Rome tremble. The next, he was being lowered through the opening into the black void below. The lower cell consumed him. There were no torches down there, no crowd, no music. Only the sound of soldiers working above, and the faint echo of celebration bleeding in from the streets. The lower chamber of the Tullianum was not built for comfort. It was built for erasure. The stone walls wept moisture. The air was suffocating. The floor was uneven, damp, and fouled by the bodies that had come before. Here, the mighty did not receive grand executions on platforms. They did not get fire or spectacle. They died strangled in the dark, like criminals whose names would never matter. Vercingetorix, the man who had dragged Caesar into desperate battles and forced him to fight for every inch of Gaul, ended here with a rope crushing his throat. Above, the triumph continued. Caesar rode in his chariot, wearing a laurel crown, absorbing the cheers. Priests sacrificed white bulls at the temple of Jupiter. Musicians played. The city feasted. Down below, Vercingetorix's body sagged against the stone as life drained from it. When it was finished, soldiers would haul him back up or drag him out through another passage and dispose of him like garbage. That was the final step in the process, from feared enemy to gasping target to corpse under a hill. All so Caesar could point and declare, "Look what happens to those who stand in my way." He was not the only one. Rome turned this into a pattern. Another king, Jugartha of Numidia, received the same treatment, only slower and more cruel. Jugartha had been a serious problem for Rome. He ruled part of North Africa and knew exactly how to exploit money and alliances. When senators arrived, he paid them off. When generals marched, he stalled, bribed, and ambushed. He understood Rome's corruption and weaponized it against them. The Jugarthine War dragged on for years, exposing just how rotten Roman politics had become. It humiliated the Republic. Eventually, the Romans found a general who could not be bought, Gaius Marius. Jugartha was betrayed by an ally and handed over. That should have been the end. But Rome was not satisfied with simply removing him. It wanted a performance. It wanted to demonstrate that even this clever, slippery king, who had once mocked their power, could be crushed in public. In 104 BCE, Jugartha was paraded in Marius's triumph. By then, he was no longer dressed as a ruler. He was a wreck. Chains bit into his skin. He had been held in captivity long enough to strip away his health and his pride. People who had followed the war recognized him and shouted. For them, he was proof that Rome, when it finally focused, could clean up its messes. For Marius, he was a prop, a moving symbol of victory. After the march came the final stop, the Tullianum again. The same stone, the same pit. Jugartha was dragged inside. Soldiers stripped him of his clothes, even ripping off his earrings so roughly they tore his ears. He was shoved toward the opening. Ancient writers say that as he was lowered into the cold, foul cell, he cried out in delirium something like, "By Hercules, how cold is this bath of yours?" A line dripping with bitter irony. This was not a bath, it was a tomb. They did not bother with a quick strangling for him. They locked him in the dark and left him with nothing. No food, no water, no light. The king who had once commanded armies and negotiated with consuls now clawed at stone walls in the blackness. He lasted several days before starvation and thirst finished what Rome had started. Above, people told stories about the clever African who had finally met his match. Below, his body lay in silence. Vercingetorix, Jugartha, dozens of others whose names survive, hundreds more whose names we will never know. They came from Gaul, Spain, Greece, Judea, Syria, Dacia. Some had ruled wealthy lands. Some had led brave resistance with nothing but local warriors and hope. Rome processed them all through the same machine: capture, parade, humiliation, disposal. Sometimes strangled in the pit, sometimes killed in a public execution, sometimes left to rot in a forgotten prison, sometimes spared and transformed into a living trophy, like Zenobia. Not every captive ruler faced immediate death. A few were kept alive as political instruments. A defeated prince might be dragged through the streets, then fostered in a Roman household, molded into a future puppet. A former king could be allowed to live under surveillance in Italy as proof that Rome could kill him at any moment and simply chose not to. But make no mistake, the choice always belonged to Rome. Their law did not protect these people. It barely recognized them as human beings with rights. That is the core of this story. Roman legal language looks careful when you read it on a page. Terms like Ius Gentium and law of nations sound civilized. They sound like rules shared by different peoples. But in practice, those laws drew a hard circle around Roman citizens and Roman allies in good standing. Outside that circle, you were exposed. If your city resisted and lost, you lost your legal personhood. The system that spoke about justice and procedure suddenly went blind. You were property. Your body, your children, your dignity were all subject to the will of the victor. Look again at the cases we have walked through. Zenobia, who extended her power across the eastern provinces, is dressed in suffocating gold and marched until her muscles shook. She survives, but only as a controlled symbol in a villa outside Rome, always under someone else's eye. Boudicca, who watched her husband's will ignored, is whipped in front of her people. Her daughters are assaulted to send a message. Even royal blood cannot shield you. She burns Roman cities, but dies by her own hand to avoid the chains. Vercingetorix spends years waiting for a staged death, then dies strangled in a filthy cell while Caesar enjoys cheers above. Jugartha starves in darkness after being paraded as the prize of a triumph. From different lands, different cultures, different wars, but locked into the same final pattern. The moment you lost, the law that defended Roman citizens no longer cared what you were made of. Courage, intelligence, strategy, honor. None of it counted. The only thing that mattered was how useful your pain and your downfall were to Rome's story about itself. These triumphs were not just celebrations for the city. They were weapons. They were moving propaganda. They told foreign ambassadors exactly how Rome dealt with enemies. They reminded allied kings that their friendship with the empire lasted only as long as Rome found it convenient. They showed Roman citizens that their state was unstoppable, that even the strongest opposition would end in chains under Roman boots. And they reached deep into the minds of everyone watching abroad. If you were a ruler on the edge of Roman territory, and you heard what happened to Zenobia, what happened to Vercingetorix, you had to think very carefully. Do you risk everything and fight? Or do you sign the treaties, pay the tribute, and hope your family will never know the feel of Roman rope? This is how empires really work. Not just with legions and diplomats, but with fear, with stories, with public rituals like the Triumph and hidden chambers like the Mamertine. One shows you the humiliation. The other completes it out of sight. What makes this even more disturbing is how the memory gets sanitized over time. In modern books and tourist brochures, you encounter words like Romanization, integration, provincial administration. The triumph is presented as a glorious pageant. The Tullianum is introduced as an ancient prison with a small chapel built over it. People visit, take photos, and move on. They might read a plaque that mentions a few names. Very few stand there and imagine a man slowly dying of thirst on that spot, while, above, the empire cheered. The stone structure under the Capitoline still exists. It sits in the middle of a city full of cafes, traffic, and tourists. On the surface, Rome sells you the Colosseum, the Forum, fountains, and pretty ruins at sunset. Underground, beneath a church, the old execution chamber remains. You can step inside, feel the damp, and study the rough walls. The place is small, cramped, oppressive. It is easy to walk through without understanding that this used to be the last room many powerful people ever saw. The distance between how Rome looked and how it operated is the key to understanding it. On one side, philosophy, law codes, Latin literature, public baths, aqueducts, magnificent architecture. On the other, a system that could strip a queen naked of rights with one defeat, drag a king through the streets in chains, or whip the ruler of an allied tribe in front of her own people because a greedy official wanted more land and gold. You can admire Roman engineering and still be honest about its brutality. You can be fascinated by the legions and still see that their victories fed a machine built on humiliation. If anything, understanding both sides makes the history more real. It stops being a postcard of marble statues and becomes what it actually was: a world where law protected some and abandoned others, and where the greatest honors in the state were built on the suffering of people who were deliberately turned into objects. So next time you hear the word triumph, do not picture just a general in a chariot and cheering crowds. Picture Zenobia, with her shoulders digging into heavy gold. Picture Boudicca standing up after a whipping, planning revenge with bruises still burning. Picture Vercingetorix standing at the edge of a black hole in the prison floor. Picture Jugartha feeling his way around a dark cell, realizing that no one is coming. And then ask yourself, what did Rome actually fear more? Enemy armies or enemy stories? Because every chain, every public beating, every execution in that pit was designed not only to punish bodies, but to control the narrative. To make sure that when people spoke about Rome, they spoke with fear, not hope. If you stayed with this story to the end, thank you. Most people only get the sanitized version of Rome. You chose to look at the side the textbooks rush past. If you want more hidden history like this, hit subscribe and tap like so this kind of content does not get buried by the algorithm. Drop a comment telling me which of these rulers you want a full deep dive episode on. And share this video with someone who still thinks Roman glory was just marble, togas, and wisdom. Let them see what was really under the crown.